All right, my name's Jimena. I want to hand it over to our speakers right away because we don't have a lot of time. To start off, I'm going to have you guys introduce yourself with your name, who you're with, what you do, and to break the ice a little bit and have fun, one of the worst ways an employer has tried to offer recognition. So Geneva will start, and don't worry, the rest of the panel will take a more positive and solutions-oriented approach so that we all know how not to be those bosses. All right, Geneva, we'll start with you.
Hi, my name is Geneva Brown. I work for the Cigna group. I'm practicing a lawyer right now, focusing on corporate governance and shareholder engagement, but have become increasingly focused on DEI and ESG. I am going to say something violent, so brace yourselves. I know. I try not to get too political, but it's happening. I think one of the worst ways to recognize employees is pizza parties. I think we are beyond the pizza party. I think it's lazy. I think employees know you're trying to save money. We're not getting one over on folks. But I also think it's worth giving a little bit of thought. And so one thing we've switched to just even like think about a snack break or a lunch focus on the local environment. So if you're a Philadelphian, one thing we've done instead of pizza, we give people tasty cakes or pretzels, like something that is like true to where we live, and that's been a lot more exciting.
I love that. I'll stop the pizza parties. So I'm Kate Feather. I work for Lincoln Financial Group, and many of you being local probably know us because of the link. I am leading currently employee experience and talent development. And so what does that mean? It really means we're putting the voice of the employee at the center of everything that we're doing, and designing programs, particularly around career growth and development, but also our most recent enterprise recognition program. And I've been at Lincoln for about 5 years. So my story, actually, it's a personal story. I worked for a small consulting firm that was growing. Owner, we had a single CEO founder, and he wanted to create a culture where everybody felt like they were involved and there was an ownership mindset. And we moved to these swanky new offices, and he had a contest for naming the office, the new conference rooms. And so everybody broke out into groups. There was tons of energy around this, people really excited about their submissions. And then you were going to have this indelible mark on the company forever because you would have named the conference rooms. Came to the day, I think we did have pizza, and he was going to announce the winners of the contest, and the winner was him. He wanted to name the conference rooms. He named the conference rooms after cities in his life that were important to his path. So I'd say no more.
Yeah. That's a really good one. I got to go after that. My name is Trevor Bogan. I'm Regional Director of Americas for Top Employers Institute. So I oversee the sales and operations in North America and Latin America as well. I'm based in Charleston, South Carolina. I have a team all over the place, which we all know is the way we work right now. And so I think the worst experience around recognition is recognizing I had leaders that recognized the way they wanted to be recognized, right? So I had a leader who was really big into golf. That was his thing. And so we worked on a sales team. We had a lot of individuals, and we were all really excited about this annual reward we're gonna get. And he announced it, and he's like, well, he sent an email out, and we were like, okay, are we going to announce it to the teams? Are we going to get everyone pumped up? He sent an email and a Dick's gift card that he emailed out to the winner. And so everyone was waiting around, but I don't want to be recognized like that. I thought I was going to get recognized in front of my peers and really celebrate. So I think the one major thing that we all can really focus on is recognize your people the way they want to be recognized, and really listen to them and give them that experience, because that's what's really going to make an impact and a difference. So,
great. Good afternoon. My name is Elaine B. Kraft, and I am with Siemens Healthineers. We're in the med tech industry, 70,000 employees globally. Until a few weeks ago, I was our global head of people and culture. So had the honor of leading employee development, global talent acquisition, learning, executive development, high potential programs, people insights and analytics, all kinds of fun stuff. And then recently took over as the head of HR for our diagnostics business. So if you ever have to have a fluid drawn for a test or maybe do a COVID test, hopefully it's on our equipment. So I started my career as a labor and employment attorney. So panicking, I'm thinking of all of the ways that were recognized that went horribly wrong that I cannot talk about in mixed company. So one that you really made me think about was a recent example of a leader who was an extreme extrovert leading a whole bunch of introverts. And so decided to recognize people by dragging them up in front of a whole bunch of other people and talking about them for a really long time. And this leader thought what he was doing was really showering them with love and gratitude, and they were all physically in pain standing up there. So to your point, figuring out what matters and resonates, it's not that hard to do, and really matters quite a bit.
Yeah. Mine is also pizza party.
Yay!
Along those lines, a quick poll. How many of you have ever felt as though you weren't being properly recognized by your employer? Raise of hands. Wow, a lot of you. I know I've had jobs like that. This isn't a new issue. What is it about this moment that has employers getting creative around the idea of employee recognition beyond money? We can keep this a bit broad. Trevor, I'll start with you.
Yeah. So I think it's really interesting. So my organization, we are in the HR practice space. And so we had come out with a World's Trends report earlier this year, and we interview and survey over 4,000 organizations globally, regionally. And what we found was 45% of organizations don't have an employee listening strategy. So they're not even listening to what their employees are doing, how they feel, how they want to be recognized. Because as we know, times are changing, right? I have a laptop, a book bag, Airbnb, Verbo, and I'm out of here, right? So that's the way people are living right now. That's what we're, confronted with. And so I think right now you really have to be observant, listen to your employees, listen to how they want to work, what works well for them. And what we're finding is you really have to be more person-centric than people-centric, because everyone's different. What I look like and value in my life is going to be different than what you value or anyone does. But have those conversations and dialogue around the people themselves, how they like to work, what makes them thrive, and what the support that they need, and give them that flexibility, but give them that opportunity, and really be a good listener. Because I think sometimes when we have leaders, we really love to hear ourselves talk. We love to talk about ourselves and what's going on. But the more we listen to our employees and really give them that psychological free space to be themselves, I think that's truly impactful for organizations to do.
Elaine, what is it about this moment that has companies thinking about employee recognition in new ways?
I think it was such a shock to every single one of us that I couldn't just reach out and say thank you. And now I have to either search for a spot in Outlook to say thank you to you, or I have to find a way to look into the camera and let you know I'm being sincere. I mean, this fact of, we were all just ripped away from each other in such a sudden way. And everything that each and every one of us had built over our careers or built over our existence just as being humans to say thank you didn't seem to work anymore. So we've got to be super creative, and I think also come back to the basics. You're talking a lot about asking people and hearing what they need. I think we also have to act on what they tell us, and that seems to be that next hurdle that a lot of our managers and companies are struggling with.
Anyone else have anything to add?
I mean, I would just underscore what you said about that moment in 2020, and we had employees telling us, I feel invisible. I feel like my contributions and the work I'm doing isn't being seen anymore. And I think that's why we elevated recognition up our list of our ridiculous list of priorities, and said, this is what we got to work on. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, and I think the other moment in 2020 was the murder of George Floyd, and I feel like that forced people to start to be thoughtful about what was happening in society at large, but also in communities close to them. And so we now are in this space where people were forced, but now we're in the habit of bringing more of their personal selves to work. And they're looking for a space where they can be authentic, where they can be unique. And we don't have the option anymore just to say that there's a very clear demarcation between work and family life, or just, talk about work-life balance and hoping people can keep the scales equal. It is a lot more fluid, and we have to start to figure out how to recognize all of the personal challenges and achievements that people bring to work with them, even if it doesn't necessarily fit in a clear box that this is a work thing.
Yeah. And I love this question as a reporter. What's at stake for the companies that don't find better ways to recognize their employees? And what does that mean for a company's culture? I will start with Kate this time.
Sure. So I'm going to answer that about what's at stake for the business, and then I'm also going to talk a little bit about culture, because I think those two things go hand in hand. There's a report that came out from the Gallup organization and WorkHuman, who is the vendor that we work with for recognition. I think it's from praise to profits, and they've been able to really quantify the impact of recognition on things like three things. So a 9% increase in productivity, and then double-digit decreases in absenteeism and accidents like safety incidents. We ourselves, now that we have data at Lincoln on recognition, we've been able to see that of the people who leave in any given month, our organization voluntarily, 75% of them were not recognized in our program. So we know that there's a higher proportion of people who are choosing to opt out if they're not being recognized. So that's like the business case, right? But the other piece on this, I think, and for me, it's personally much more important, is the culture, right? So I'm a huge believer in what gets recognized gets repeated, right? And that's actually, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I know enough to be dangerous. And like that, when you give recognition, you feel appreciated, you get the dopamine, the serotonin, and then you're like, oh, that feels good, I'll do it again. And the thing is that when you want to create a culture which is about common behaviors and common ways of working, recognition is one of the best tools you have, particularly as you have this distributed workforce. People they don't have the opportunity for those, like when we were in the office, social norms really changed our behavior. We looked at, people clear their desks before they leave, or so there's stewardship and there's behavior I see going on, but you don't necessarily see that obviously today. And so I think to get those behaviors to be repeated, and those behaviors are the behaviors of our culture, you really want to use recognition for that purpose.
Yeah. Elaine?
Yeah, this sounds dramatic, but what's at stake? I'd say everything. Because if we don't have people, we don't succeed. We're not yet at that point where companies just, I think, are run without people. And if they don't want to go the extra mile or the extra inch, or even get to the point, that minimum to get the job done, then we're not successful. So, I'd say we have everything to lose. I love the dopamine rush that we get from appreciation, and even just that thank you. Saying thank you costs nothing, and taking the moment to do it pays. The return on that investment is huge.
Yeah.
No, people are your walking billboards, let's say. Those are your people out there, right? So everything you do internally is going to affect how they react outside of work. Networking, people that they talk to. We hear so many stories around it's hard to retain talent, it's hard to bring talent in. These are the folks that you really want to recognize and take care of, because they're going to bring you talent. They're going to say, hey, I was really recognized with this organization. I have a voice with this company. They're really starting to take some of the things I say and apply them. And so that's really inspiring to people. And we all talk about good energy and things like that are out there. And when you have more people that have good energy, they're going to live by that. They're going to go out in their communities and talk about your organization, talk about your leadership, talk about your HR initiatives. And that word spreads fast. So I think sometimes we get in our own heads and start worrying about ourselves and what we do all the time. But your people are your biggest asset. They're out there promoting your business 24/7. So
Yeah. And now I think is a good time to sort of pivot to the specifics. How have companies landed on what recognition programs look like for them? Geneva, I think you had a really good example, so I'll start with you.
Yeah, so to Trevor's point from earlier, we started by listening. I was president of our DEI Council for our legal and compliance department. And what we found is we had tried sort of DEI committees, councils, collectives, whatever buzzword you want to attach to it, and they have all frankly failed for our department to really address real issues and move the needle. It wasn't happening. And so when I took over, it's like, how about we just start by listening and figure out what people have to say and what would resonate with them. And one thing that we found just through listening is that people were so invested in their local communities, and they really wanted to get together with their colleagues and do something good. There was this feeling that like team building was missing, but they also wanted a point in their workday where they could use their skills and their passion to actually give back. We weren't expecting that, right? Because very often, especially if you think about legal and compliance, we aren't the nicest people in the room. But also, we had separated things like employee recognition from other things like corporate responsibility or ESG or community engagement. And those things were not aligned, but we found that that's what employees wanted. And instead of forcing our approach on them, we said, let's just run with it. And what we found was that ended up being a path for so many other things that we wanted to accomplish from a business case. So that ended up being the most successful avenue to actually get people to show up into the office before we rolled out our return to work plan. If we had a volunteer event, people were more likely to show up for that than they were to show up because there was a town hall. And that surprised us because we didn't see that coming, but we saw like people wanting to roll up their sleeves was something that really resonated with their employees, and we would not have known that except for that pause break that we took for weeks, just doing coffee breaks and listening.
That's great.
Yeah. I would have never even thought to ask for that, But Kate, you also have a really good example.
We do. So we also listened, and I referenced that we were learning through our employee engagement surveys that people were feeling like they were being not recognized, not seen enough. And so then we did an internal audit across the company to sort of understand what recognition looked like in the different business areas, different functions. And it was all over the place, but the things that were consistent was that it was inconsistent, so people were recognizing different things. And then also that you couldn't recognize your colleagues, the people, the partners, the people who make you successful in other parts of the business. And that was a problem because we wanted to be one team Lincoln, and yet it was structured so that you could only recognize within your silo. So we put a business case together, and actually there is a portion of our recognition program that is financial in nature, and that you get to award people points, and it's peer to peer. So you can just say thank you, and that happens a lot. But then for those folks who are sort of going above and beyond in one of our core values, there's an opportunity to get points that you can bank, and then you can use for charitable donations. You can use to, for merchandise, or we have people going to Disney with their families and things. There are just all these wonderful stories. But in addition, we have a kind of a celebration part of this whole platform, and it's sort of a social feed. But the celebration piece is so meaningful because it's like somebody gets their MBA or somebody passes their next actuarial exam, and that gets recognized and celebrated, or somebody has a baby or buys a new house or moves, and all of those things are kind of creating this sense of connection and belonging and inclusion. We absolutely celebrate our community events when people are working together for community purposes. So it's sort of the whole kit and caboodle, and what we're, technical term, and what we're not doing is just focusing on tenure, because that's important. It's a milestone, but it is not necessarily going to drive the culture that we're trying to establish. So that's what we've been doing.
Yeah. Did anyone else? All right. Okay, this next question touches a bit on both recognition and engagement. Anecdotally, and even at my workplace, I have noticed that there has been an increased use of employee resource groups. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit about the role that these groups play in building workplace culture. Geneva, you've already brought this up, but it feels particularly pertinent after 2020's social reckoning. Trevor, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so obviously there was a lot going on in 2020. And so one of our big global partners is Puma. And so in 2020, they actually hired a head of DE&I, Michelle Marshall, and she was tasked with coming up with a plan to bring culture and diversity to the organization. So it was something that they've never started, they never came out with before. And her biggest thing was ERGs are really, really important to the organization. And so 8 people stepped up to create an ERG program with her within the organization. And so a couple things that they needed to really plan out was that everyone needs to be involved in ERGs. It can't just be everyone, peer-to-peer groups. It needs to be at executive level, people in leadership roles. Everyone can be an ally for the organization. So everyone was invited. They worked out on hybrid models so people could get involved. They didn't matter if you were in Connecticut, California, Texas, wherever you were, you can get involved in it. And ERGs, they created it around everyone mattered, right? Women, people of color, Asian Pacific, every LGBTQ, everyone has a voice within the organization. And so when they created these groups, it was built around that, and that was the foundation of it. And so what people found was that they have a voice within the organization. Everyone can understand, because I think sometimes, even in our personal spaces, we hang out with the same people, we talk the same, we live the same things, and it's great to understand where people come from and their stories and hear those things, because you have to have an understanding. And you have to have training and development around it. And you have to have volunteerism around it, because you can say everything you want around DE&I, we really believe in it, but really, what are you truly doing? Are you out in the community? Are you helping those in need? And so they built a program around that, and it's had a ton of success for them. And so ERGs are really important to get people to be able to have a voice within your organization. And I think we need to really have conversations around understanding where people come from. I don't live the same way as everyone else, but I need to understand that. And we also need to focus on those conversations can't stop. It doesn't just stop with George Floyd. It doesn't just stop. We're still living these things. We're still going through these things. So make sure your teams are continuing those conversations and continuing to learn and develop, because that's really important for you to make sure that people have a voice within the organization and there's some understanding around it. So it's a great way to recognize people.
Yeah. Geneva, we'll go to you because you already brought this out, kind of.
Yeah, and I think one way to think more broadly about ERGs is, sometimes we start with diverse status, and those are more of the obvious categories when you're trying to establish ERGs, but it's important to think beyond that as well. Sort of, if you can and you have capacity, there are some things that might bring people together that isn't just a diverse status, right? It might be, the people who are veteran or have military experience. It could be, for sure, someone who has a disability, or perhaps their parent or child has one, or it could be that people are caregivers, right? There could be a very broad range, I think, of reasons why people might feel like a certain ERG is a safe space for them. Because as I mentioned before, if people are bringing their whole selves to work, we don't want, and for the hope of being inclusive, we don't want to exclude people because they don't fall into one of the narrowly defined diverse categories that we pick, and look at the list of ERGs and say, well, there's no ERG for me, because I'm not X. And so thinking beyond that is important. And when we were, when in my work was particularly with legal and compliance, there's one thing we were very intentional about. And instead of just thinking about partnering with ERGs, we thought, can we partner with other business units? Can we partner with smaller groups? And some might be informal. So we decided to do, for instance, just one program where we brought together, Black women and had a mentoring program. It was just a circle of trust where people had a safe space and they could sort of bring their professional development questions and also share strategies and intentionally put people together that were different band levels so they can actually learn from each other in a way where it felt safe and they didn't always have to explain, sort of what they meant, because people were aligning around this kind of specific experience they all had that was, not, the same as this umbrella ERG group.
I also like that, at least with my ERG groups, I feel like I'm getting to interact and chat with people from other departments that I would never get to speak to. And it's like, oh, wow, you really care about this issue, even if you don't fall into that particular, category, if you will. Which leads us to our next question. I was one of the many people who started a new job in the middle of the pandemic, fully remote. And even now that we're hybrid, I think back and I realize it was really hard to get a sense of the culture, and working environment. And that made it really hard to be an engaged employee, which I would like to think I typically am. How are companies adjusting to the idea that some workers are not going to be in the office every day, and it's just harder to keep them engaged? Elaine, I'll start with you.
Yeah, full disclosure, I never thought I'd be excited about employee engagement surveys. That was just I feel like I'm amongst friends. I can say something like that. I'm so excited about the way that we've been able to use ours. When we were prepping for this, I said, maybe I can actually talk about how I as a leader, rather than I as something in HR, handled employee engagement surveys. So I moved into a new team in January of 2022. Our engagement survey is a pulse survey. We do it once a month. It was every 2 weeks. When I got there, I was like, no, that's too much. So we do it once a month now. For context, the company's engagement survey our benchmark was an 8.5, which was the top 10% globally in the healthcare industry. So our peers in the survey that we use. So 8.5, okay, that's cool. Luckily, I didn't know it was an 8.5, so I get my first results, and we were at a 6.8. 6.8, 95% response rate. So they were super upset and really wanted me to know about it. And I thought for a second, well, they'll just forgive me because I'm new. And that was like a half second. And then I realized I only have one chance to be new. I only have one chance to turn this around. So I pulled my team together. Global team, 160 all over the world. So my direct reports, we came together and I said, I don't know how we got to this point, but this is when we're gonna change it. And each of us has ownership. So just a few of the practical things that we can all take back and do ourselves. No matter how you find out they're unhappy, there's ways to go about it. First, I went through and I read 6 months of comments that were in there. There were times my husband asked me to stop doing that because it was a little bit depressing. But I took notes and I saw themes. I did 160 skip level meetings. I met with every person in the organization, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. They had to look me in the eye. There were a couple of them where we were, having some language barriers, but we had a conversation. We started doing what we call culture at work dialogues. And this was a broader initiative, but I made sure that we brought it to life in our team. We have 5 values, and we came up with a super simple way to just sit with a team, either an intact team, a project team, a bunch of random folks you pull out of the lunchroom, and you sit and you talk about your values. Where are we doing a great job? Where are we missing the mark? Where do we want to ask each other to do better? And what are the actions that we can call out of that? So within my team, we took those actions and we started to make things happen. We also had this wonderful ability in our engagement tool to have a conversation. So an employee can leave a comment anonymously, everything's anonymous. I can respond. The managers in the chain between me and that person all can respond and see, so I can see what managers below me have said. So we made an agreement, my direct reports and I, that we would respond to every comment. That took a lot of time, but I learned a lot. And I think something beautiful happened one day. I'm sitting there in front of Teams, if that can be a beautiful day, and this person pops up and says, hey, I'm the one you've been going back and forth with about this one topic in the engagement survey, and I'd love to have a conversation with you about it. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've won. And he's a Gen Z, California, very different background to say, I don't know where you come from and you don't know where I come from. We talked for an hour and a half. I cleared my schedule. And he went out and told everyone that happened. So the fact that I said, no, I can't go attend this important meeting, but I'm going to spend time talking to one person, the return on that investment was massive. And it wasn't hard. There are those moments when you open up the engagement survey and you're like, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to make them all happy? Well, you're not. That's not our job. But making sure that they understand they've been heard, that if you see something that's inaccurate, that you can clarify, that you do that. If there are themes that come up that you can talk about more broadly, that you do that as well. So I just left that team, and the team, we together managed to go from a 6.8 to an 8.7. So we are now higher than the rest of the company.
Yay.
Yes. And nobody's here for me to go, we're hired. But now I feel like when my managers who have so much to do, right? Bet the business, get the turnaround, all those things, when they say, this is the last thing I'm able to influence, I can easily say wrong. And we can do it together, and it's not rocket science. So I can't believe it, but I have turned it around. I love engagement surveys.
Trevor, what are companies doing to?
Yeah. I mean, I love engagement surveys too, but so one of the things
do you?
I don't, but anyway, I'll say it anyway. But anyway, no, so I think, one of the things that we did is we have our own engagement survey. And I think what we found, we're a global organization. We have over 200 employees. But I think what people found was the connectivity part, right? So they didn't feel connected to their leaders. They didn't feel connected to their other team members. And so we designed what we call an all hearts meeting. And so this gets everyone involved on a global scale within the organization. So different business units. And we get on there monthly and we recognize each other. We play games. We do trivia. We have, new employees who get hired onto the company. They can come on and they put a little presentation together just to go through their background, what their interests are. All of those things really matter. Also, one of the things that we found was we really needed to do some leadership training. And so we did leadership training around empathy training. And I think what was really important with empathy training is just trying to understand everyone's different, right? And trying to make sure that you understand that you're listening to your employees. And that takes time. And so the way I think about business, I grew up in a blue collar environment. It was just working, right? To me, there was no time off. You don't call out sick, you just work. But that's not everybody, right? So I really had to understand and empathize with people where they come from, learning about their backgrounds. Are they single parent? Do they have kids? Is there a lot of running around to do? Do they have a sick relative that they have to take care of? There's all these dynamics that go outside of work that really people bring into work sometimes. And so you have to be empathetic around those conversations. So all of our leaders went through empathy training to really have those conversations because you have to have them with your employees. You can't be scared to have conversations around serious topics. Your employees want that and they need it. And they're really asking for it. And so that's really been productive as a whole organization, just to get to know each other, really work effectively with each other.
Yeah. Kate, you said something earlier that really struck me. A lot of the topics that we're talking about, they go hand in hand, right? To building a better workplace culture. I'm curious, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges when it comes to reconciling this idea of recognition and engagement efforts to create an overall better workplace environment?
So I think my esteemed colleagues have sort of touched on it. It comes down, one of the biggest challenges is it comes down to the leader, the manager. And we have been very aware of that from the perspective of, sort of bias, right? Like proximity bias. So we've been doing manager dialogue conversations, right? So managers join a conversation once a month on a Friday, and they're bringing, we bring them content and they're discussing some of their challenges. And it's been extremely successful just to kind of create a safe space for managers to learn about some of these things that might be getting in the way. Because ultimately, you've got to be truly intentional and pay attention, which is exactly what you're saying, particularly as for us, the proportion of people who are co-located with their manager is significantly lower than it was a few years back. Another challenge I think that we were concerned about, and we built our program to address that, was around unconscious bias. So will people be recognizing people like them, and will there be bias in the system? And so because we have data, we can actually highlight, and managers have dashboards where they can see, who am I recognizing and how often, and are there people on my team that I haven't recognized, and why haven't I? And so that we're really sort of trying to drive some level of understanding. And then I'd say the third challenge is one of, for us, because there is some funding towards this, is where the budget sits. So it is a centralized program right now, but there's talk of pushing it to the business. And I get, cold feet, like wake up at night thinking about that, because what will happen is it'll get cut, it'll be the line item on the business unit's budget, and even though they know that it's adding value, it's the first thing to go, and it will start to re-encourage people to just play recognition within their own spheres, within their own silos. So we are pushing to maintain a centralized budget for recognition and a centralized approach, because otherwise it becomes diluted.
Yeah. Geneva, what are some of the challenges to bringing all these elements together and boosting workplace culture?
Yeah, just to add one more challenge, I really think a lot of it boils down to communication. I think very often we may have existing programs or resources that people don't know exist. Or if they know that they exist, they don't know that they're impactful. And you see that, some things that sound really good on paper are being underutilized. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we come up with very good ideas, and we might even implement them, but we don't take that last step of ensuring that there is adherence, that people know that they're there and are encouraged and incentivized to use them. I think the other aspect of communication that's a challenge is, communicating with each other. And I think sometimes, particularly now, there's a fear of cancel culture. And so people are like, well, instead of putting my foot in my mouth, I'm just not going to say anything. That's hard, because you don't know what people are thinking. They're not encouraged to ask questions because they're so scared of running afoul of some rule that they may not even know exists. I accidentally married a stand-up comedian. I said accidentally because when we got married, he wasn't a stand-up comedian, and he pulled a fast one on me years later. But one thing I've learned, through that process is there are so many things, that he will say that when he tells me at the kitchen table he's going to make a joke about this, I'm like, you cannot say that in public, right? But he finds a way to make it funny, and it will often open the door for other conversations. And humor is just, I think, one way where we can start to communicate around some really maybe tough topics, but that could be really helpful to open up about this, right? And so just to give you an example, I'm often the topic of jokes, which I do not love. But at one point my husband decided he was going to shave his facial hair, and facial hair is like makeup for men. It changes the whole look. And he came to me, he's like, what do you think? And I just paused, like, And he was like, well, he's bald and he is, brown skin. He was like, oh, well, I thought this made me look like LL. And I just had this shocked face like Cool J. And he was like, that was probably the worst feeling I've ever had, because by your reaction, I knew that I definitively did not look like LL Cool J in this moment, right? And he turned that into a joke, and it was really funny. So I actually went back to work and told people about this. And it's so funny because it started to open the door door for all kinds of like random conversations with people just by the fact that I told this really personal joke about something that happened with my family, and it made other people start talking about their family. And I got things like, someone that may have had something like, alopecia and opened up about the fact that they have this or their child did, right? Like just very small things that seem small in the moment, but it's so freeing if you can find a way to communicate around topics that are hard and difficult, but allow people to really share, not just like share at the surface, but really start to share.
Yeah. We have time for one final rapid fire question, which I'm really curious. How are companies measuring the success of the efforts that we've discussed today? Kate, I'll start with you before they start playing us off with music.
I'm sorry, I'm going to bring up engagement surveys again. No, we have been able to see that our employees are feeling significantly more recognized and valued than they were prior to all of this change that we introduced. So,
Elaine?
I mean, obviously engagement surveys, but also employee referrals and reduction of attrition.
Yeah.
I think engagement surveys, and also what we do as an organization is we give you data analytics around your HR practices and what you do every day. You're the foundation of organizations. What you implement, what you put in place really guides the success of your organization. So sometimes you just really need to know what you do well and what you don't do well, but strategize around that. So continue to think that as a focus besides the employee part.
Geneva?
Attendance at pizza parties.
Yeah, gift cards.
You guys have really changed my mind about engagement surveys. Yes. Well, that's our time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.